All right, well, good morning. Glad to see you guys here. Just want to make point of a couple other things. Jessica obviously mentioned we're coming up on Easter, so don't forget your Easter invites. When we first came here, see, today is a really special day for my wife and I. The first Sunday in March marks 11 years. That's today. 11 years that we've been here and had the privilege to serve here at New Life. We were a young couple, childless in our mid-20s, and didn't have a clue about ministry. 11 years later, we're not in our mid-20s. We have children, but we still don't have a clue about ministry. But hey, we're making some progress. We had about 50 people. Our first Easter, we had a goal of 150 people for worship that Sunday. Man, we pushed, we invited, we did everything we knew to do to get as many people as we could here to church that first Easter. And we ended up with 133 people. We missed it, but just a little bit. But there was so much excitement and enthusiasm in the air. You would have thought there were 3,000 people here. It was so exciting. Since then, God has just blessed our church tremendously. Not just in our weekly attendance having grown and multiplied from 1 to 3 services, but in 2016 we hit our highest mark ever for Easter, and we had 901 here that Sunday. So that's incredible. We saw over 50 people give their life to Christ that particular Sunday. But I believe that 2018 is going to be a record-breaking year. And we can start this Easter. And so I want to challenge you to get your Easter invites. Make sure that you're inviting friends, family members, neighbors, whoever you can come across. Strangers, enemies, bring them, right? Jesus said, love your enemies, bring them. And let's see, not only can we have an extremely high attendance Sunday, but let's make sure that we give as many people as possible the opportunity to experience new life in Christ. So that's one of the major things that we're excited and just want to announce today. But also, yesterday, our men's event, New Life's first ever men's event. The Stepping Up conference was yesterday, and we had initially planned for and expected maybe around 40 or 50 guys to come out. And we thought, if we get that, that's going to be a win for the first time. We had over 75 guys here yesterday. So that is an incredible, incredible blessing. And so if you couldn't make the conference yesterday, but you would like to be a part of the ongoing Stepping Up study that they're going to be doing, that's the next 9 Saturdays. You have to commit to at least an hour, which is it's not a half a day thing, but an hour for the next 9 Saturdays. See Eric, our discipleship pastor, after church, and he will be able to give you the information and share with you how to be a part of that. But then also, excited about some news concerning our expansion. This is something that has been sort of an ongoing process that has gone on way longer than I ever anticipated, even though I had other pastors tell me, bro, slow down. Like, this is going to take you a while. We've had some very good turn of events, I guess you would say, over the last couple weeks. I had a meeting 2 weeks ago with our lender, and they have analyzed our church and our financials and everything and come back wholeheartedly and said, New Life Church is definitely a healthy church financially. You're ready to do a project like this. We have no reservations about moving forward with you. We just need some hard, fast numbers as far as a budget on the project so that they can then present it for approval. In the meantime, though, we also had a meeting with an alternate construction company who has come along and looked at our plans and has really encouraged us by saying, listen, the number that you guys have started out with, that you've been basing your plans on, which was like $1.8 million, they said, listen, we believe we can do this project for much, much less than that. And so they are working right now to get us some numbers on what they believe they could do the project for. Said it'd take them about 3 weeks, so hopefully we'll have something to share with you on that front by Easter. So right now, between now and then, please be praying and let's be asking God for favor. I believe this is going to be the moment that we get to move forward this year and start putting some shovels in the ground and seeing some real progress. But like I said, just be praying. all of us in agreement and believing that God's going to do a great work here. Thank you for those last week who responded to Trey's message and you gave generously. We appreciate that. But also want to extend that challenge to anybody else that hasn't stepped up to that commitment. Please consider doing that, and let's all band together and make this happen this year. So that's a few things that are going on in and around our church right now that I'm really excited about. And then on top of that, finally, is this series that we're entering into today. Incredible. The next 3-4 weeks are going to be absolutely phenomenal as we get closer to Easter and sort of get ourselves in the right mindset, get our hearts in the right place to celebrate the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. And we start this journey out this week talking about the Rooster and redemption. Now, I know you guys didn't see the banner as it came in because it was a casualty of this week's wind. And so usually as you drive in on Sunday morning, it's right there so you sort of know what we're talking about today. But we suffered a loss this week, and we'll be holding a memorial service for that tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. here at the office as we put it in the dumpster. So if you'd like to be a part of that. But anyway, the Rooster and redemption, and you think, gosh, what does a rooster have to do with anything in the Bible? And we'll get to that in a minute, but I just got to thinking about this, of how this particular farm animal sort of became an icon of quite a well-known Bible story. And I started reflecting on my interactions and experience with animals and farm animals and chickens and roosters and all that. And, I grew up in the country, sort of rural area. Jessica's a city girl. And I've never, until we had met and got married, I had never lived within the city limits of any place. I'd always lived sort of in the country. And definitely had never experienced living in a housing development, which I've been in now for how long have we been there? 14 years? So forever. I'd never thought of living like right beside somebody else, and still am not very fond of it, and we're planning on getting out of there. But she was used to that kind of thing. I was used to growing up, there being cows and goats, and like I said, I wasn't a farm boy. I didn't live on a farm, but we had those kinds of things around, cows and goats and chickens and things like that. When I was really young, we lived beside my great-grandparents, and he had 2 large chicken houses where he raised chickens. And I was so young, I remember very little about it, so I don't know if he raised them to sell or what happened. But as I grew older, those disappeared, and those 2 structures became storage and a body shop, and they're still like that today. But I grew up around that kind of stuff, and even my dad now has a few chickens. It's sort of a hobby kind of thing, and my girls love to go over there, chase the chickens around the yard and feed them and all that kind of stuff. My personal favorite part about chickens is all the fried portions. That's what I'm fond of, But that's about the extent of my experience with farm animals, roosters, and chickens. But it's just amazing to me that we come to a very well-known Bible story about Peter's denial of Jesus, and there to represent it is a rooster. It's like, what in the world does that have anything to do with in the particular story? And we're going to take a closer look at that a little bit today, but more so in the next few weeks. But this is an event that took place in the last few hours of Jesus' life on this earth, right before the crucifixion. The night before he goes to the cross. And Jesus says this, and this is where the whole rooster thing comes to the surface. In Matthew chapter 26, if you're going to be following along with me, verse 34, Jesus tells Peter, "Truly I tell you, this very night, before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times." I don't know if you're aware of it or not, but there's a lot of birds mentioned in the Bible. And I didn't go through and count every instance or anything, but it said that there are about 50 different types of birds that are mentioned throughout the Bible. With every book of the Bible, except for 21, there's 66 books of the Bible, every book except for 21 of them mention a bird or birds of some type. But none of them are quite as famous as this one rooster. As a matter of fact, this one rooster is so famous that there is even a church in Jerusalem, still there. People still worship there. Visitors by the thousands and millions come by every year and visit this church. There's still a church in Jerusalem that commemorates, is sort of dedicated to this rooster's appearance in the Bible as it pertains to the event of Peter's denial. It's just too bad that the story is not about the rooster. It's not about a rooster at all. I mean, it makes for a catchy title because everybody's thinking, the rooster and redemption, man, yeah, I don't know what the heck he's going to be talking about, but I'm going to be there. What the story's really about is that second part. Not the rooster, but the redemption. The story's really about God's plan. The story's about the fulfillment of prophecy. And unfortunately, as we know the story so well, the story is about denial. It's about desertion. Not just of Peter, but of all the disciples, and then by extension, us. All of us. And so what we're going to do here, before we get too far, is read the beginning and the end of this particular story. I'll fill in the gaps as we go along, but I know that there might be some of you who's not very familiar with it, so I want us to all start out on the same page here. So if you're looking with me in Matthew chapter 26, we're going to start in verse 31. As a backdrop, Jesus and His disciples have just shared their final Passover meal together. Some people refer to it as the Last Supper. You may have seen a picture or a painting of that, the Last Supper or the Lord's Supper. All right, at the end of their meal, we're told they sing a song and they head out to go to the Mount of Olives. As that's taking place, this conversation happens. Matthew 26, starting in verse 31. Then Jesus told them, "This very night you will all fall away on account of me. For it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. But after I have risen, I will go ahead of you into Galilee." Peter replied, "Even if all fall away on account of you, I never will." "Truly, I tell you," Jesus answered, "this very night, before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times. But Peter declared, he insisted, even if I have to die with you, I will never disown you." And all the other disciples said the same. Now again, after this takes place, they go to a place called Gethsemane. Gethsemane was an olive grove at the base of the Mount of Olives. And it was there where Jesus prayed a very famous prayer. "Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Yet not my will, but yours be done." Right? That may be familiar. It was there in the Garden of Gethsemane where Judas betrays Jesus for 30 pieces of silver. He is arrested and taken to the high priest where a mock trial begins that evening. All of the disciples run away scared, except for Peter. We're told that Peter follows along after Jesus at a distance. He wants to see where they're taking him and what's going to happen next. And it would seem as if Peter is the last man standing. That Peter is going to be the only one who stays true to his commitment and true to his promise to never deny Jesus until we get to verse 69. And it says this: "Now Peter was sitting out in a courtyard, and a servant girl came to him. 'You also were with Jesus of Galilee,' she said. But he denied it before them all. 'I don't know what you're talking about,' he said. Then he went out to the gateway, and another servant girl saw him and said to the people there, 'This fellow is with Jesus of Nazareth.' And he denied it again with an oath, 'I don't know the man.' After a little while, those standing there went up to Peter and said, 'Surely you're one of them. Your accent gives you away.' Then he began to call down curses, and he swore to them, 'I don't know the man.' Immediately a rooster crowed. Then Peter remembered the word Jesus had spoken, 'Before the rooster crows, you would disown me 3 times.' And he went outside and wept bitterly." When I read that, I wish there was some way I could just jump in to the story. If I could go back in time and grab Peter and like, man, what are you doing? Like, why are you doing this? This is so obviously wrong. Like, where is your head? You see, we can't do that, can we? The past is the past. What's happened has happened. But what's interesting is we do have a way, sort of, to go back and get into and dive into the text. This method called exegesis, all right? Jessica and I were talking about that just a few weeks ago, and she's like, what is that? I don't even understand what that... And it's a term that you would learn in seminary or Bible college. It just simply refers to a careful analysis of the text. That's our means. That's our vehicle to go into the text, carefully read, and extract from it truth, okay? And so that's what we're going to do today is sort of jump into this story and hopefully gain some understanding of Peter's denial. It's sort of like when you were in middle school, high school, maybe did this in college, like in biology or something. You had to do a frog dissection. Or maybe it's something really cool like a dissection of a pig or something. Like, we love that kind of stuff, and all the girls are like, yeah. The only way sometimes to gain some really clear understanding of something is to cut into it, to dig, and to probe for the answers. And so that's what we're going to do today with denial. Like, we've all heard about it, and we have our theories about what it is and how it might apply to us, but surely not, Lord, not us. We're going to do a dissection of denial so we can truly understand what it's all about. And so I think that today we still are going to leave here not knowing really what was going on in the mind of Peter. That's not the point. The object of today's message is simply to shed some light, not on necessarily his denial, but on ours. Like, why do we do this? Why do we cut and run? And why do we flake out when things get hot? And so that's probably the premise that we need to just go ahead and deal with this morning and just own, is that this isn't necessarily a story about Peter's denial, it's about ours. Because Peter's not the only one guilty here, is he? Every single one of us in some way, some form, has or is denying Christ in our own way. And so we need to find out why is that and what can we do about it. The first thing that we run into as we sort of analyze this story deeply is we run into what I'm going to call denial predicted. That is the very first element of the story that we need to talk about. This denial that was predicted. And if you think back to the conversation that Jesus was having at this table with his disciples, sharing this Passover meal, he looks up and down the table and he says, tonight, one of you is going to betray me. And immediately that sparks conversation because everybody is looking around wondering who this person might be. And they all begin to chime in. Surely it's not me. Lord, I would never do anything like that. I am loyal. I am faithful. I've got your back. I'm never going to turn on you in any way. Now, he obviously knew who that person would be. Jesus already had in mind, he knew from the foundation of the world that the one who would betray him is named Judas Iscariot. But the guys sitting at that table didn't know that. They may have had their suspicions. And they were talking back and forth amongst themselves, and I can hear the whispers and the suspicions and the sharing of circumstantial evidence. You know, I've had my eye on this guy, and I'm not too sure about him. So there's all this conversation, all the while assuring themselves, assuring Jesus and one another, it's not me. I wouldn't do anything like that, right? And then, as this conversation is taking place, and everybody's making their case as to why it could not be them, Jesus levels this sort of sweeping, all-inclusive prediction. In verse 31, he said, this very night you will all fall away on account of me. For it is written, in other words, it's been predicted, it's been prophesied, that I will strike the shepherd and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. Jesus is saying, in less than 24 hours, guys, not a one of you will be left standing. Like a row of dominoes. When the lead man is struck, when he falls, the rest will do likewise. You'll scatter. And Peter comes back and he insists. It said he declared, even if I have to die for you, if that's what it takes, giving my life, I'll do it. I will never, ever turn my back on you. And what's interesting is the last phrase of verse 35, where it says, all the other disciples said the same. Peter's the only one recorded saying it, but every one of them said the same. You know what else every one of them did? They did the same. They said, I will never. But all of them did. And so this is that connection that we need to make. What about us? Do we really believe that we're any better? That we would have done anything different? As we were sitting at that table, would we have thought that the one who would betray, the one who would deny, the one who would fall away would be us? Probably not. But if we were there, I'm guessing, just like these guys, we would have all done the same. We're not so much different. And as I was reading through and studying and gathering resources for this particular message, I kept coming across sort of this common thread among commentators and those who have studied the text and history extensively, studied the human mind and behavioral patterns, and the majority held belief as to why these disciples and why we often have our moments of denial comes down to two major factors: weakness and fear. Weakness and fear. Weakness is just simply referring to the element of human frailty as a major contributing factor to those moments of denial. See, right after this back and forth that Jesus and His disciples had, it says that they headed off to the Mount of Olives. And when we remember what happened there, Jesus asked 3 of His disciples to keep watch and to pray. He was going to go off a little bit to a distance and pray by Himself. And every time He returned to those disciples, 3 times, He returned and He found them doing what? Remember? Sleeping. And Jesus said, verse 41, the spirit is willing, but the flesh is, say it with me, weak. The flesh is weak. You see, none of us set out to deny Jesus. That's not an intention in our heart, to turn our backs on Him, to betray Him in any way. The Spirit, who I am at my core, is determined. This is who I believe I really am and what I would really do. The Spirit is willing. The flesh is the problem. The flesh is weak. In those moments of pressure, sometimes it becomes too great. The hour of trial seems like it's a few minutes too long. And in our frailty, we falter, we crumble, we give in. So there's the component of weakness, but then there's also fear. After the 3rd time, Jesus comes back and finds these guys sleeping. He says, get up. I mean, it's already happened now. My betrayer is coming. And then through the darkness, as they're gathering themselves, they can see the flicker of torches. And as the lights get closer and closer, they begin to hear the clanging of armor. And it says in verse 47, while He was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, arrived. And with him was a large crowd armed with swords and clubs, sent from the chief priests and the elders of the people. We're talking about temple guards, and also likely with them, perhaps some Roman soldiers. Every single one of them armed to the hilt. And can you imagine the fear that gripped them at that moment? I mean, I'm just going to be honest with you. My heart starts racing when one policeman pulls me over, right? You see those blue lights come on, and it's like, do, 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 do. Even if I'm innocent, I'm like, what did I do? You know, it's just a rush of adrenaline, because you know, like, they represent the authority. They can haul me off to jail for like whatever reason it might be, okay? And so my heart begins to race. Could you imagine like seeing a whole SWAT team approaching your house or your vehicle? I mean, the fear would absolutely paralyze you, okay? And that's sort of what we're dealing with here. And it's no wonder that in verse 56 it says that they all ran. I don't blame them. That seems to be the best option. You stay here, you die. Run. Get as far away as possible. But Peter stuck around. And like I said, you would think maybe he's going to be the one who takes a stand. But then later we read that as he stood by a fire, it wasn't the fear of soldiers and swords that ultimately got to Peter and gripped him. You know what it was? A little girl. The words of a girl. It said that a servant girl came up to him and was like, aren't you one of those guys? Don't you follow Jesus? And I mean, I can just see it. The fear just encases him, right? And he gives her this surprised, nervous look. He begins to shake his head. I don't know the guy. I don't know. I don't know you, Jesus. And he backs away. He begins to flee. It says he goes from by the fire, he goes out to the gates, where another girl, I mean, these middle schoolers are relentless, right? Another girl comes up to him and says something similar. Aren't you one of those guys? Don't you know this Jesus? And again, he's getting more and more nervous by the moment. And he begins to take oaths. I promise you, I've never heard of this guy before. And then finally, all of them, a whole group of people, you have to be one of those guys. You talk like them, and man, Jesus, Peter, he begins to call down curses. I don't know any blankety blank Jesus. It's like, wow, that escalated quickly. What in the world just happened? Is that the way it has to be? Remember, it's not just Peter. They all did the same. They all said the same. They all did the same. But that's not the way it has to be. Because Jesus had already given them a remedy, sort of a fix for denial. You can prevent this if you do two things. And he told them up front what those two things were. Watch and pray. He said there in verse 41, this is like the third time he said it. Watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. Be on the watch. See, this word watch is much stronger than the way we think about it. In the Greek, it's not just to observe or to look at something. It means to give strict attention to something, to be cautious. All right? So that something, namely destruction, doesn't suddenly come upon you and overtake you And so that's the message. Jesus wants us to be constantly on the lookout for those inward threats that would exploit our weaknesses, those outward threats that would fuel our fears. Watch out for those things so they don't lead us to a place of denial. Be alert. And then he said, and to pray. Prayer is that simple act that demonstrates our trust and our dependence upon God for what only He can do. Through prayer, we're acknowledging our own weakness and saying, Lord, I'm weak, but You're strong. I can't do this, but You can. You see, that's how you win the battle. And understand this. If it helps to put it in some context, that's how Jesus won the battle at the cross. He won the battle at the cross because He won the battle of prayer in the garden. He had set His heart and His mind on total dependence upon the Father. That's how He was able to do God's will, not His own. He won the battle of prayer. Someone said, if we don't, sort of gird ourselves, make ourselves strong in the Lord, and the only way to do that is through prayer. If we're not strong in the Lord, we'll be weak in our humanity. Weak in our humanity. So the first element of this story is all about denial that's predicted. The next thing that we come to is denial performed. We see it actually happening just the way Jesus said it would. Verse 56, all the disciples had fled. They had all cut and run except Peter. But like Peter, in Peter-like fashion, he's going to go out in a blaze of glory. Like every single time. He is an extremely flamboyant character. And as you read through the Gospels and you follow and listen to Peter and his actions, he's an extreme kind of guy. And you think, if anybody's going to stick to his word, it's him. But just like I described, man, does he go down like the Hindenburg. I mean, in a blaze. Throwing cuss words and pitching a fit, kicking dust up. I mean, people are like, wow, how did it ever come to that? All the attention is on Peter. But we need not forget, just because Peter denied using a few expletives, they all did and said the same. They had their own way. But it all came to the same result. But why? Well, yeah, there's these elements of weakness and fear. But again, I think if we'll take a little closer look at the text, what we're going to find is that there are some times, there are some circumstances in which we will find ourselves more susceptible to denial than at other times. And these times we can find represented by some of these disciples, and one of those is when we're dormant. Jesus came to these three disciples, Peter, James, and John. On 3 different occasions, He says, what I need from you is to watch and pray. What you're doing is sleeping. You're laying dormant. And that's dangerous. See to it. If you watch and pray, so that you won't fall into temptation. Dormancy leads to denial every single time. And it's obvious here we're not talking about physical sleep. We're making a spiritual application. You see, when we relax, when we get dormant, when we get sleepy in our spiritual habits, guess what's just around the corner? Denial. Solomon, one of the wisest men to ever speak and write, said, a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands, and suddenly. Why did Jesus want us to watch? So that something wouldn't suddenly come upon us. Solomon said, a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands, and suddenly disaster will come upon you. Your spiritual life will crumble. in a sleepy state. Another time that we seem to be more susceptible than others is not only when we're dormant, but when we're desirous. When our desires start moving to the forefront of our lives, what we want. And of course, to me, this is represented by none other than Judas Iscariot. And we all know his story, and nobody ever wants to be compared to Judas, right? We see this guy as a thief, as a crook, just a low-down scoundrel, because he took some money in exchange for the Savior. But let me ask you something. Was it about the money? We all know about the 30 pieces of silver, and perhaps that would have been a good take for the day. But was it really all that much? Was it about the money, or was it that he desired something else? The money was just a way to get the wheels going. Was it because he desired a different outcome? Jesus has been talking about, sheep's going to be scattered, I'm going to be beaten, I'm going to be betrayed, and I'm going to be crucified, and all this kind of stuff. And he's starting to put the pieces of the puzzle together, and he's like, wait, whoa. I didn't sign up for this. And his desire said, let's do something else. Maybe it was his desire for a different mission. He's all about Jesus and following him, but not to death on a cross, but maybe death in rebellion, insurrection, the overthrow of Roman rule. Maybe that's really what he desired. Or maybe he desired to do both. We can accomplish a nationalistic goal, we can accomplish a spiritual goal, but we need a different strategy. So I don't know what it was. But when you boil it down, it was his desire that opened him up and made him susceptible to betrayal, denial, desertion, just like it does for us. That's why James, the brother of Jesus, wrote in James chapter 1, verse 14, each person is tempted. We're susceptible to denial, betrayal, when they're dragged away by their own evil desire. When we're desirous, we can be led ever closer to denial. Another time we might feel prone to denial, to desertion, is when we feel like we're defenseless. Again, think about being one of those 11 disciples. And all of a sudden you find yourself surrounded by armed guards, temple guards, Roman soldiers, and we don't know the exact number. How many of them were there? I'm going to guess more than 11. But Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they all said a large crowd. Now, depending on your perspective and how you define large, that's a wide range. John sort of narrows it down for us a little bit. He still doesn't give us an exact number, but depending on the translation you're reading, he says it was a detachment of soldiers, a cohort of soldiers. That language defines for us a number around 600 or more. 600 against 12. The 11 disciples and Jesus. You don't stand a chance. No one can overcome those odds. And so, again, that's the point of comparison for us. When you feel like everyone is against you. When you feel like you're the only one standing up for what's right. When you feel like the entire office is against you. When you feel like your entire family is against you. When you feel like the entire school is against you. When you feel like the world and the odds are stacked against you. That's when it becomes easy to deny Jesus and to desert our convictions, to walk away. And Jesus said the only way to avoid it, watch and pray. Be alert and depend on the Lord. Ask for strength, ask for courage, ask for boldness. But then you got Peter. Like I said, Peter's always that unknown variable out there. Like, how is he going to react? What's he going to say? What's he thinking? What does he represent? And for me, I think Peter, he represents those times in our life when we're disoriented, when we're confused. Peter just couldn't make sense of it all. He couldn't understand, why is God allowing this to happen this way? Why, if Jesus is the Messiah, is he now being taken into custody? And it looks like things ain't going to turn out good for him. You see, it's at those times of disorientation, those times of confusion, it leads us to a place of frustration. And if we don't walk through those times of frustration in faith, believing that God is God, that He's in control, He's sovereign over every situation, you know where that frustration may lead? Abandonment, denial, desertion. We run. You see, it ought to sound familiar to us that Peter thought he was stronger than he really was. Never in a million years did he think that he would be the one to do what he did. See, but that night when the rooster crowed, he remembered. Immediately he remembered the denial that Jesus predicted. And he suddenly realized that he was guilty. He was the one who performed it. You see, that's a sobering place to be. To take Peter's name out and to insert our own. That Jesus could have very well said the same thing about us, and we would, like Peter, have done the same. That's sort of a discouraging place to be, and that's not necessarily where I want to leave you today. I mean, it's a sobering thought. It's the truth. We need to own it. But I want to leave you with some hope, with some encouragement. Because this story, you need to know where it leads. It leads to a hill called Calvary, where Jesus Christ would give His life. He would bleed and die for sinners, deserters, deniers, like Peter, like James, like John, like you, and like me. And 3 days later, He would rise from the dead with hope and life in His hands. So that this story wouldn't end on the denial that was predicted or the denial that was performed. This story would end in redemption on denial that was pardoned, that was atoned for, that was covered in the blood of Jesus. And we're going to look at this a lot more through the rest of this series, but we need to leave thinking about this thing. After Jesus was resurrected, here's sort of what happened. There were some ladies who came to the grave. They did so to prepare His body for burial because it was sort of a rush job. The Passover was upon them, and it was against their ceremonial law to be doing certain things. So it's sort of a rush job. And they came back after the fact to anoint His body. And when they got there, they discovered an empty tomb. And you can imagine all the questions and fears and like what's going on. But the Bible tells us that they were confronted by an angel of God. And there in Mark chapter 16, verse 7, this angel tells them, "Go tell His disciples and Peter." That's an important part right there. Go and tell His disciples and Peter. He's going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see Him just as He told you. You see, when I read that, I can't help but think if there's anything in the Bible that says, I forgive you, I love you, I'm not bitter or resentful toward you, it's those words right there. Go tell His disciples and Peter, I'll meet you there where I told you. You see, there's so much happening there. I wish we had time to just to get neck deep in it. What he could have said, go tell those disciples, those hypocrites, those deserters, those low-down, rotten betrayers, that I don't need them. They're good for nothing, and I don't ever want to see them again. I'll do it myself. But he didn't. Go tell them, and you make sure, if you tell any of them, you tell Peter. You tell Peter that I'll meet you there. Where is there? Geographically, it doesn't really matter. There is the point of restoration. The denial, the desertion, the crucifixion, death. All of those things are matters of separation. But when Jesus rose from the dead, He restored all things. All things become new. And see, for some of us, I know that maybe this entire message you've been thinking about that moment. Or maybe that area in your life, because we all have them. At any moment we could say or do something that would just absolutely scream, I don't know the man. And if we were to peel back the layers, there may be some areas in our life where God would point out and say, that right there says, you don't know me. Is that really who you are? Right? I want to challenge you this morning. Don't run from that. Don't hide that any longer. Because Jesus is saying, it's already been paid for. I knew that was going to happen. I knew that would be a part of your life. I knew you would say that. I knew you'd do that. That's why I went to the cross. And so now, if you're willing, if you'd like to go further in this relationship, I sure would. And so let's go there. Where's there? That place of restoration. That place where we reconnect. And that could be this altar. That could be a prayer closet at home. Wherever it is, where you need to connect back up with Jesus and move forward with Him. I want to challenge you today. Go there. Because you know what you're going to find when you get there? That you're not alone. He's already there.